Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate Investments and Mid-South Homebuyers.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education. This is episode 64. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Happy New Year to you. From the Patagonia region of Argentina, north to Caribou, Maine, and Nome, Alaska, across the Americas, and in 148 nations across the world, you're listening to the massive value-adding and wealth-building Get Rich Education. And what better way to start the year than with helping you manage your reputation? And today we're talking with well-known reputation expert, Dorie Clark. Now, whether you're currently working at a workaday job or a corporate job with the goal of having passive income in the future, or you're a full-time real estate investor now, there's a lot of value to be added to your life with the content of today's show, even if you're a business owner. So let's get going and meet Dorie. Dorie Clark is a marketing strategy consultant, professional speaker, and a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review, Time, Entrepreneur, and the World Economic Forum. The Associated Press, Fortune, and Inc. magazine have all recognized Dorie as a branding expert. She's the author of immensely popular books, Reinventing You, which has been translated into multiple languages, and her most recent book, Stand Out, was named the #1 leadership book of 2015 by Inc. magazine. Dorie consults and speaks for a diverse range of clients, including Google, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, the World Bank, the Ford Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Yale University, the Mount Sinai Medical Center, even the National Park Service. Dorie is a former presidential campaign spokeswoman. She's an adjunct professor of business administration at Duke University's business school, and she's taught at a number of business schools. If I continue to go on with Dorie's accomplishments and accolades, we're never going to get to meet her, so let's meet her now. Welcome to Get Rich Education, Dorie Clark.
Hey, Keith, thanks for having me.
Dorie, now you've been so widely recognized as an expert on personal branding. And, I think that term personal branding, when some people hear that, they want to be a cynic. To them, it's like a personal brand. That seems kind of flaky. I don't need a personal brand. I'm just a regular employee at a regular company. I really just want to make some money. I mean, why in the heck do I need a personal brand?
Well, I think that one of the reasons why the term personal brand has sometimes gotten a bad rap is that people assume that the connotation is that if you have a personal brand, that somehow it's saying that that's the equivalent of a corporate brand, that, you have to sort of position yourself like a soap or a detergent or something like that, when in actuality, personal brand may be the modern term that's used, but essentially what we're talking about is something that has existed from the beginning of the time. It is simply a synonym for your reputation. And I think that most people in business recognize that your reputation actually is pretty important. And so if you are developing a burgeoning career as for instance, a real estate investor, having a good reputation is actually one of the most valuable assets you can have in the marketplace, because when people hear your name, they'll know they can trust you. They know that you're a person of your word. You are the kind of person that they want to sell to. Nobody wants to sell to somebody that is going to cause them a million headaches and problems and things like that. So having a good personal brand actually can put dollars in your pocket.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I think of personal brand and reputation as being synonymous terms. If someone says that they don't care about their personal brand, you're kind of thinking to yourself, oh, so you mean you don't care about your reputation? And that's the kind of thing that gets a person's attention because your reputation often precedes you. So what are some of the best techniques for managing a brand?
So broadly speaking, the way that I think about it and the framework that I articulate in my first book, Reinventing You, is that basically when it comes to developing a strong personal brand, it's a 3-step process. The first step is getting clear on what your brand is right now, because nobody is a blank slate. people think something about you. And so the question is, how do you get clear on what that is? And that's something that oftentimes you need to get feedback from trusted friends and colleagues about, because it can be very hard to determine that on your own. That's number one. And I'd be glad to talk about any of these in more depth. Number two is creating a future vision for yourself of what you'd like your brand to be, because oftentimes it's not the same thing as where it is now. So you want to be able to map out what's the distance between here and there and what do you need to do to get there. Sometimes that might involve gaining new skills or getting different experiences. And then third and finally, it's what I call living out your brand. And that is understanding the ways that on a regular day-to-day basis, you can make sure that the message about who you are and what you're capable of is getting through to people. And that's by taking on activities like, for instance, taking a leadership role in a professional association or starting to write or give talks about your ideas so that other people can really see how you think and what you're made of.
Okay, so starting from where one is now, I guess it might seem kind of awkward for a person to try to figure out what their personal brand is right now. I mean, what do you do? Just go around and saying, "Hey, what do you think of me?"
Yeah, if you do it that way, that probably would be pretty awkward. So I have a couple of variations about how folks can do it. One exercise that I actually talk about in Reinventing You, it's something pretty simple. Anybody can do it. It's called the 3-word exercise. And basically, the assignment goes like this. Over the course of the next week or so, go to about half a dozen friends or colleagues. And this should be people you trust, people that you know pretty well, that you know you have a good relationship with. And just say to them, hey, I have a question for you. And you can even blame me. You can say, I was listening to this podcast. They had this exercise they said we should try. If you had to describe me in only 3 words, what would they be? And that's obviously not a hard question to ask. That's something that somebody can answer in a minute or two. But once you start recording these responses and you see, the fourth, the fifth person, by the time you get down there, you're going to start to see patterns in what they're saying about you. And that is really instructive, basically because it's not that we as human beings don't know the range of who we are. I mean, we have a general sense, but the part that's really hard for us as individuals to know is, out of all of the aspects of your personality, what stands out the most to other people? What do they think of as being most unique about you? And getting that information can be really valuable because it tells you what other people see as being your defining characteristics.
Right, and that's probably more valuable feedback than what you think about yourself, is getting those perceptions of others to kind of transform yourself from where you are into where you want to be. And it's kind of like something I've said on my show before. I kind of think of it as be who you are becoming, but you need to know where you're starting from and where you're going. So I guess, how does one determine, how they migrate where they are into where they want to be?
Yeah, so in terms of that process, I think that as you begin to formulate this future vision, you begin to say, all right, well, what I'd really like people to say about me when I leave the room is XYZ. As you're charting out the difference between where you are now and that desired end state, you can begin to essentially work backwards and say, all right, if I want people to think of me as like a really strategic, visionary leader, but instead what I'm hearing from people is that they think I'm really good at tactics and execution, but not so much on the vision piece. What are the things that I can do to beef that part up so that other people really grasp it? And so it begins to present possible solutions. So essentially, how can you display that trait in a more visible way so that people can see it? So maybe that might involve something like volunteering to chair a committee so that you can be the person setting the strategic decision and letting people know, hey, our committee's goal is XYZ. And doing things like that. So I think in a lot of ways it depends on the particulars of your goal, but you really want to just work backwards from that future vision. It could be something like you want to be seen as a really great manager, but you're hearing from a lot of people that you kind of micromanage or you don't give good enough directions to people. And so if that's the case, maybe it's something really tactical, like, gosh, I should take a continuing ed course about it, or I should read 5 really great books on management so that I can learn what I should be doing differently. So those are the kinds of roadmaps that you can set for yourself as you move toward the desired future state.
Trying to think of how to ask it. How do you make sure that your brand represents you well? For example, if you want to be some visionary leader, but you know through maybe taking Colby tests and things like that, that no, you're kind of better as a tactical finisher. Does that mean you need to stay a tactical finisher, or can you truly just continue to migrate and try to be who you are becoming if you want your brand to be a visionary leader?
Yeah. So essentially, I guess, to a certain extent, your question is about how much is your personality your destiny in some ways.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So I think the first question that I would ask myself if I were in that situation is number one, how much does my goal really matter to me? And then number two, how is it actually true that developing this skill is mandatory for achieving that goal? So, for instance, maybe my goal is that I want to become the president of my company. That's a great goal. Maybe it's really important to me. And maybe I've looked at the people who are like the last three leaders of the company, and they were very visionary, strategic leaders. The issue is, okay, that's what it's looked like in the past, but is that strictly necessary? Maybe it is in a certain corporate culture. Maybe that, that's what the company needs. That's sort of the principles that it was founded on. But it's also possible that that's a historical accident. You might have a situation where you could be a really good sort of internal tactician. And as long as you have a good team around you and you're really smart about surrounding yourself with trusted lieutenants who can fill out those skills for you, you may yet be able to be successful. So it's just asking the questions about what's really necessary and is there another way to kind of come in the side door for your goals.
Part of this collaboration with groups is a meeting environment. Even in an increasingly virtual world, we still have a lot of meetings. And oftentimes when someone speaks up and articulates well in a meeting, that seems to resonate quite a bit further than if it were a one-on-one conversation. So what's a really good way for a person to kind of get attention and respect in meetings before they even show up and walk in the door?
Well, that's a really great question. And in fact, I interviewed a couple years ago for Forbes a guy named Robert Cialdini, who some of your listeners may be familiar with. He's the author of the well-known book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. And he's one of my favorite thinkers. I actually interviewed him for both Reinventing You, my first book, and Stand Out, my second book, because I feel like the guy is so full of great insights. But for this Forbes piece, I asked him the question, and what the topic of the conversation was how do you get people to like you immediately? This is kind of,
Mm.
an important question. You meet somebody, and sometimes, just we've all been here, right? Sometimes things just kind of go haywire, and you walk in the door and you just feel like, wow, this person doesn't like me, or this person doesn't respect me. And from minute one, you're having to kind of overcompensate for that. And that is not the situation we want to be in. You want to try instead to do everything you can to tee it up from the beginning so that the minute you walk in the door, people treat you with respect. They're like, oh, wow, Keith, it's so great to have you here. We're so honored. How do you get that? And so what Robert Cialdini told me is an interesting strategy. And that is a few days before you meet somebody for the first time, for instance, if you have a meeting set up with them, what he suggests doing is sending them an email. And the email should have a headline that is pretty much guaranteed that they're going to want to read it. So it should be like, in advance of our meeting on Thursday. And so this is just a short email. This is not something that is so exhaustive that they're going to say, oh man, I'll get to this later. It should be just a paragraph, maybe two paragraphs tops. And basically what you want to say in it is, Keith, I'm so looking forward to our meeting on Thursday. In advance of our meeting, and in order to make it as productive and as efficient as possible, these are like magic words here that nobody can say no to. I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about my experience with, insert topic that you're going to be discussing. And then from that point on, you can go on to essentially cite your credentials. I did this, here's my background. And the reason that this is effective, he says, is that there is a difference psychologically in terms of how people perceive written information versus information that is presented orally. If I walked into the meeting and I just started reciting my bio to you, you would probably think that I was a conceited jerk, just like, oh,
Not a great first impression. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. All she wants to do is talk about how great she is. But if you do this on paper, and especially if you do it under the rubric of how to make your interaction more productive, then it's like, oh, wow, thank you for making me aware of this because now I know what your background is so I can ask you more intelligent questions or we can have a more intelligent conversation. So doing that is one of the best ways that you can stack the deck in your favor and make it more likely that from the outset, the person is going to be really pleased to be talking with you.
That's a really great idea. I think of my listeners and I think of myself prior to visiting a real estate investment market. Sometimes I can tell I made a pretty good impression on people with some of them within 15 minutes. They ask about, wanting to buy a commercial spot on my podcast. And others I can tell that, things just went okay. We just kind of went through the motions and went on a tour. So that's a really great idea to set the stage up early, let them know what your qualifications are, and you can still come off and appear as very modest and likable that way. Now, Dorie, I know that there's something that you've discussed previously, and it's basically called the wingman strategy, which kind of helps give one a reputation that precedes them. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. So this is actually another piece of great advice from the psychologist Robert Cialdini, who collaborated on a paper with Jeffrey Pfeffer from Stanford. And what they discovered is that just as people receive information differently when it's presented in a written format as opposed to orally, people also perceive information really differently if I'm talking to you about me or if someone else is talking to you about me. And so here's what it could look like. Basically, if I go to a trusted friend or colleague, my wingman essentially, and I say, hey, at the next conference, at the next networking event, let's make a pact. I will focus on talking you up if you do the same for me. That can actually be really powerful. Now, of course, this needs to be somebody that you legitimately like and trust and respect and, would feel really good about promoting.
Right.
But especially for people who feel nervous about personal branding or they feel nervous about coming off as bragging too much about themselves, this is great because you really don't have to think about it. Instead, your goal is just to look for situations, appropriate situations in the conversation to highlight your friend and their accomplishments. So if you meet somebody at the conference that you think would be a good connection for your friend, you say, "Oh, wow, that's so great that you mentioned China. My friend Marie actually just got back from working 2 years in Shanghai. You guys should really connect." And you make it happen, but you just look for ways to help your friend shine. And if you're both doing that for each other, it has a great multiplying effect because people take praise about you much more seriously if it's coming from somebody that is not you.
Yeah, absolutely. Boy, that's a great way to do it. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is the author of Stand Out and Reinventing You, Dorie Clark. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Cash flow real estate investors nationwide and worldwide, this is Get Rich Education's Keith Weinhold. Forbes has rated Memphis, Tennessee as the #1 cash flowing market in the world. Our good friends at Mid-South Homebuyers have been Memphis's premier turnkey real estate provider for 14 years with a stellar reputation and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Owner Terry Kerr was born and raised in Memphis. Yeah, he knows the market and has renovated and sold over 1,000 houses in the Memphis area. Find out what their many repeat buyers already know. Their houses are completely renovated, even come with a 1-year builder's warranty and a lifelong rental guarantee. They're a perfect fit for the first-time out-of-state investor or the seasoned investor diversifying their portfolio. Mid-South Homebuyers' friendly staff makes investing easy. Learn more at midsouthhomebuyers.com or give them a call at 901-217-HOME.
Are you having a hard time finding great investment properties? Unfortunately, the best deals are rarely found locally. Successful investing begins with the right properties in the right markets. Norada Real Estate provides everything you need to invest in the best deals across the U.S. Our simple, proven system will help you create real wealth and passive monthly cash flow. Get your free copy of the ultimate guide to passive real estate investing at noradarealestate.com/guide. That's NORADA realestate.com/guide.
This is Entrepreneur on Fire's John Lee Dumas. Don't follow money. Make money follow you with Get Rich Education.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. When she was 14, Dorie Clark entered Mary Baldwin College's program for the exceptionally gifted. When she was 18, she had already graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Smith College. 2 years later, she got her Master's of Theological Studies from the Harvard Divinity School. You can follow her on Twitter. It's at Dorie Clark. That's Dorie. So, Dorie, we're talking about reputation here, and which is sort of synonymous with personal branding. And I've kind of been thinking about this over the break a little bit. We talk about passive income here a lot on Get Rich Education, especially building that through real estate. I think when you've got a reputation, especially one that sort of precedes you, it kind of works for you like passive income does. You have it out there working for you while you're not working.
Yeah, I think that's a really apt analogy, actually, because it also shows the value of investing today so that you can reap the benefits down the road. The things that you do today to build a strong reputation, to build a strong brand, will definitely pay dividends. Let's say you make a commitment now to write one blog post a week sharing your expertise related to real estate investing or something like that. It's not a huge amount of time, but that commitment as you do it, by the second year, the third year, the fourth year, you've got multiple hundreds of articles out there just from search engine optimization alone. A few years down the road, even if you don't even do anything more, you're still going to be getting people who recognize your name, who find your information. It's kind of like putting money into the stock market when you're 20 and just letting it sit, and when you're 60 you say, wow, compound interest rocks.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, we've kind of turned the corner a little bit into virtual reputation. I think we had been talking more about in-person reputation and branding previously, and things are a bit easier now. If you want to go ahead and get your work out there, I mean, there's so many more tools today for doing that and enhancing your brand and giving the world a feel for who you are. With LinkedIn's on-publish tool, for example, it's gotten a lot easier to do that. What are some of those tips and techniques for improving one's virtual reputation?
I think it's a really important question, Keith, because even 10 years ago, it wasn't such a big deal. But today, you really have to manage both facets of your reputation. You have the in-person reputation, which people have always had. What do your friends and colleagues, the people who are directly doing business with you, what do they think about you? Are you comporting yourself with integrity? Do they think that you have a smart perspective on the market, that kind of thing? But more and more, you also have to be conscious of your online reputation, because we are, all of us, faced on a daily basis with people who, if they schedule a phone call with us, if they take a meeting with us, certainly if they're going to do business with us, they're going to vet you first fairly extensively online before they even agree to take the next step. They don't want to waste their time on somebody that would be a bad fit or a bad prospect or a bad partner for them. So what can you do to make sure that your online reputation is as stellar and well cultivated as the care that you've put into your in-person reputation? I think there's a few important things. The most important is I am actually a big believer in creating content. And the reason for that is both a sort of proactive and a reactive one. And a very basic reactive one, let's hope that there's nothing bad about you online, but there's a lot of things we can't control. I mean, one of them, for instance, is, let's say there's somebody who's a criminal that has your same name that might not even have anything to do with you. If something like that comes up, certainly it can make life pretty difficult for you. And so certainly it's even worse if it actually is something about you. So how do you prevent that from happening or take action if that has happened? Well, really the only thing that you can do, it's very hard to get things off the internet. I mean, certainly if it's legally untrue, if it's libelous, you can get lawyers involved and try to get it taken down, but that's an onerous process. And if it's a matter of opinion, well, people can post what they want. But the thing that you can do, which is extraordinarily powerful, is you can drown out the bad stuff with good stuff. Meaning, if you put yourself on a very diligent schedule of creating all kinds of content, that could be blog posts on LinkedIn, it could be opening a Twitter account and posting on it regularly about your field, about real estate investing, whatever it is, about a certain geographic market that you focus on. You could go nuts with whatever you wanted. Maybe it's Instagram, since a lot of real estate investors would want to be showing off pictures of the things that they're doing. It could be a podcast like this. But if you're creating valuable content that is tied to your name, that is what's going to be rising to the top. And anything negative, either that exists now or might exist in the future, is going to be stuck buried at the bottom. And that is really powerful because most people are not going to go beyond page 1 or page 2 of your Google results. If you can flood the zone with positive, on point content that shows you as an expert in your field, that goes a long way toward establishing a very powerful reputation for you.
Yeah, this is really important stuff. Whether you're still working a day job and you want to keep your career opportunities open, or if you're an aspiring real estate syndicator and you need to find partners and investors in your deal, this is huge, both in person and online. I mean, it's a lot more important in person because people just don't work for the same company for 30 years like they used to. You might be thinking, oh, everything's cool with my boss. He knows a good worker. I work hard for them. But things are a lot more interchangeable than they used to be. People just don't work for the same company forever.
That's exactly right. That's another reason why your personal brand is so important. Because in the past, if we go back 20, 30 years, if you were working for the same company forever, well, that's great. The people who needed to know you did know you. You would establish your reputation over time. But because these days we're doing business with so many different types of people or working in different companies, those folks, if you're just kind of parachuting in out of nowhere, they don't know anything about you. And so it really is a huge advantage if you can find a way to ensure that your positive reputation precedes you.
Yeah, that's right. If you do an in-person interview, it's you and another candidate. Well, that hiring manager is, probably going to do quite a bit of research online before they even interview you and maybe after they interview you too. And if both candidates are liked equally, but you stand out well online, you've got a lot of great content that really shows who you are, that's really going to help you out quite a bit. Dory, and you might know people like this in your life too. I have a few friends in my life who I know they like to say things like, oh, I don't use LinkedIn. I guess I have an account that I set up a while ago. I don't ever check it. Or, yeah, I've got a Facebook account, but I'm not really on it. I mean, these are really important tools for getting your brand out, getting your message out, and multiplying yourself at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It does not pay to be a Luddite these days. I mean, that being said, I think that it is understandable to focus, and that's a little bit different. I mean, I think sometimes there's a feeling of pressure that, oh my gosh, I have to be on every platform, I have to do everything, and as a result, people kind of overcompensate and they say, well, I'm not going to do any of it. And
Right.
I think that's the wrong move. I mean, it's true that you don't have to be on 10 platforms, but the opposite of that shouldn't be being on 0 platforms. It's useful to pick a couple. LinkedIn is, probably the best one for professionals, but LinkedIn and maybe 1 or 2 other things, and just focus there. Don't worry about it. You don't need to be making Vine videos if you are, a professional looking to do business opportunities. But it's important to have at least a toe in the water of social media.
Right, because if a person has little or no social media profile, or if when you Google their name or try to learn something about them and you find little about them or you find absolutely nothing about them, I mean, that might be half as concerning as finding a whole lot of negative information.
These days, it's actually really concerning to employers if they can't find much information about you online. Almost everybody, just by dint of existing, has some kind of a paper trail. And so if you don't, you are the exception, and they are going to wonder why. I consulted a few years ago with an organization that was hiring a senior executive. And when they were getting ready to make him an offer, before they did that, they decided they would do a Google review just to make sure there were no red flags. And when they couldn't find any information about him online, they freaked out. And it actually delayed the hiring process by multiple weeks because they wanted to go back and find other references and talk to them because they had become very concerned that he might be fabricating his background because they thought it was just so strange that he had no paper trail. It turned out that he was being perfectly upfront and he had done everything he said he had done, but he almost lost the job because they were so disturbed by his lack of presence on the internet.
We're an investing show. Investors don't like uncertainty. And if you're trying to learn about a person or doing business with a person and there's nothing out there about them, that brings a great deal of uncertainty. And no one likes that, investors included.
Absolutely. You want to mitigate people's perceived risk in doing business with you, and making sure that you are present on the internet, that you are creating content that shows how you see the world, that you are knowledgeable, that you are informed, that you have a thoughtful perspective on things, is a really good way to make people feel like they know you, even if they haven't spent that much time with you. It just increases their perceived sense of comfort.
Reputation and personal brand is so fragile. It's that attribute that can take 30 years to build and yet 30 seconds to tear the entire thing down. So it is just unforgivingly fragile. That's why I think our discussion is so important. So, as we're winding down here, Dorie, any other things that a person can do to best manage, build, or get their reputation to where they want it?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've found to be really useful, and this is something that I talk about in my most recent book, Stand Out, is that when it comes to really, building your brand, spreading your ideas, that is a process that ultimately begins with having a small group of trusted advisors around you, because those are the people that are going to be able to really help you learn, grow, determine which of your ideas are good ones and are worth pursuing, and which ones are not. And so if you have that in your life, it's an incredibly valuable resource that helps propel you and your reputation forward. They can basically be your ambassadors in the world. And if you don't have that, it can be really hard, because you're just operating in an echo chamber and making your own guesses, some of which are going to be good and some of which are not going to be good. And you won't really know the difference between them. So I think that taking the time to develop, personal board of directors, a mastermind group, whatever you want to call it, is something that can really pay big dividends for your career.
Oh, that's another good idea. So, I think I kind of consider time as perhaps one's most important, I guess I'll call it resource in life. If that's true, then maybe reputation is the most vital attribute that one has.
Absolutely. It's really crucial. And I'll also mention that for folks that are interested in diving into building their personal brand, their reputation in the marketplace, I actually have a free resource on my website that folks can download if they'd like. It's a free 42-page workbook based on my book Stand Out. And people can get that for free at dorieclark.com, which is DORIECLARK.com.
Yeah, and Dorie has a lot of terrific resources at that website. Dorie, is there any other best way my listeners can connect with you?
Yeah, thank you, Keith. I'm also on Twitter at Dorie Clark. And on my website, I actually have more than 400 free articles that I've done for places like Harvard Business Review and Entrepreneur and Forbes. And so hopefully people can find some good tips there that they might like.
All right, Dorie. Well, I think all my listeners got a great return on their time invested today. I sure did. Thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thanks. Great talking with you.
I've heard some say that your reputation is in the hands of others and that your character matters more, which, I'd agree with a lot of that. And your character is something that you can control. But, you want your reputation to reflect your character. And as you've seen today, you can certainly affect your own reputation. And some things are just obvious professional courtesy. I talk about your return on time invested a lot here. Well, do you show up to meet others on time? I mean, that's a huge thing to me because it kind of means that you respect other people's time. Are you more of a giver or more of a taker? Giving first, that usually leads to reciprocation. And for those that continually don't reciprocate toward your giving, well, then they probably aren't the people that you want to be doing business with anyway. And personally, I like to give to the givers first. Having a great reputation is a form of wealth that almost can't even be quantified. So I hope that you found some actionable content today to help make you more successful. Thank you for investing your time with Dorie Clark and I today. And until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education LLC exclusively.